His job was to see threats coming. The deputy head of Russian military intelligence, one of the most senior figures in the apparatus that tracks, identifies, and eliminates threats to the Russian state before they can act. A man who spent his career inside the machinery of intelligence collection, covert operations, and threat assessment, learning everything there is to know about how adversaries find their targets, how operations are planned, and how attacks are executed. A man who, by definition, is supposed to be impossible to surprise. In February of 2026, he is shot by an unknown assailant. He does not see it coming. The man whose profession is anticipating exactly this kind of threat cannot protect himself from it. And if the deputy head of Russian military intelligence cannot protect himself from an unknown shooter inside Russia, then Vladimir Putin, who is hiding in a bunker in the Krasnodar region because he has concluded that nowhere in Russia is safe, is drawing the only rational conclusion available to a person in his position. Run, hide, and hope that the walls are thick enough. They are not. The walls have never been thick enough. That is the lesson of the last 6 months of Russia's war. Not just on the battlefield in Ukraine, not just in the skies over Moscow, but in the cars and apartment buildings and Moscow streets, where Russia's most protected military figures are dying one by one in operations that require a level of intelligence penetration into the Russian security state that Putin never anticipated and cannot now reverse. In this video, we are going to look at exactly how the assassination campaign targeting Russia's senior military leadership inside Moscow has shattered the assumption of security that underpinned Putin's entire system of power, how Ukraine's deepening drone campaign is applying simultaneous public pressure against every city in Russia that Putin has told his people is invulnerable, what the collapse of Putin's domestic support, the falling approval ratings, the Z-bloggers turning, the state pollster suppressing its own numbers, tells us about how far the regime has deteriorated and why the convergence of all three pressure tracks is producing something that looks, with increasing clarity, like the terminal phase of a personalist dictatorship that has run out of options. But first, let us look at the full pattern of what is happening to Russia's military elite inside their own capital. Because the assassination of the deputy head of military intelligence is not an isolated incident. It is the latest data point in a campaign that has been escalating for 2 years. Moscow is supposed to be safe. That is the foundational assumption of the Russian security state. The capital is where the most important people are. Therefore, the capital is where the most intensive surveillance is. The FSO, the FSB, the GRU, the MVD, overlapping intelligence and security agencies covering every corner of the city with cameras, informants, access controls, and the layered apparatus of a state that has spent decades making the capital into a controlled environment where nothing moves without being tracked. If you are a senior Russian military officer living in Moscow, you operate inside this apparatus every day. You have personal protection. You have FSO screening for your close associates. You have vehicle security protocols, route variation procedures, and communication discipline that has been standard practice for senior Russian officials since the Soviet era. You are, in theory, among the most protected categories of people in the most surveilled city in Russia. And yet, in 2024, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, the head of Russia's radiological, chemical, and biological defense forces, dies when a booby-trapped scooter detonates outside his Moscow apartment building. Not in Ukraine, not at a military installation, on the street in front of his own home in Moscow, where the surveillance architecture of the Russian security state is densest. Someone knows his apartment building. Someone gains access to the street to plant the device. Someone has the operational intelligence to execute a precision assassination against a man with substantial personal security in the most surveilled environment in Russia. In December of 2025, Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov, head of the Russian Army's Operational Training Department, decorated veteran of the Chechen Wars and Syria, considered by everyone around him to be a war hero, is killed by a car bomb planted beneath his vehicle in Moscow. Again, the capital. Again, a senior officer with known security protocols. Again, an operation that requires specific intelligence about his vehicle and his movements, penetrating the security environment that should make exactly this kind of attack impossible. Sarvarov survives the blast long enough to reach hospital. He does not survive the injuries. Within hours of the bomb going off, he is gone, And within weeks of his death, Putin abandons his residences. All of them. The palatial estates in Moscow and the Novgorod Oblast that he maintained as monuments to his permanence, empty now. Putin goes underground and does not come back up. Think about what Sarvarov's death communicates to Putin directly. Sarvarov is not a marginal figure. He is exactly the category of person Putin counts among his most essential inner circle. He is a war hero, a trusted military commander, a man whose biography makes him personally significant to Russia's president, not just bureaucratically important. And he is killed inside Moscow, in the capital that is supposed to be the safest place in Russia, by an operation that required whoever executed it to know things about Sarvarov's schedule that the FSO's own protective infrastructure should have prevented from leaking. If Sarvarov can be reached, Putin can be reached. That is the calculation. And Putin makes it instantly. In February of 2026, the deputy head of military intelligence is shot. A man who understands better than almost anyone how such operations work, who has spent his career studying how adversaries plan and execute exactly this kind of attack, does not survive his own institutional knowledge. The intelligence chief who knows how to find people cannot prevent himself from being found. The message to Putin is cumulative. Moscow is penetrated. The security apparatus is penetrated. The people closest to him are being reached one by one in operations that require intelligence access to their most protected routines. And the people doing the reaching are good enough at it that 3 separate operations have succeeded in the span of 2 years. Russia blames Ukraine for all of it. Ukraine is not confirming. What matters is not the attribution. What matters is that it is happening, that it is escalating, and that Putin's response, underground, surrounded by an FSO that has confiscated everyone's phones, sending body doubles to public appearances, tells you everything about how the Russian president himself has assessed the situation. The covert campaign is one pressure track. Ukraine's public drone campaign is the second, operating in full visibility, and it is approaching a scale that Putin's own officials cannot deny or hide. In August of 2024, Ukraine launches just over 1,000 long-range drones against Russian military targets in a single month. That number triples to 3,000 by July of 2025. By March of 2026, both Ukraine's Air Force and Russia's Defense Ministry confirm a figure of 7,000 long-range strikes in a single month. Ukraine is now outstriking Russia's own peak monthly output and directing it into Russian territory at a depth that reaches 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. 2,000 kilometers is not a military boast. It is a confirmed operational fact. Russia issues live air raid alerts at that depth. Oil refineries burn at that range. Military facilities that Russia relocated eastward specifically to escape the original reach of Ukrainian weapons are no longer safe at 2,000 kilometers. The geography of the alert map tells Russia's population, every time it appears, that the distance they believed separated them from the war is no longer real. On May 4th, a Ukrainian drone penetrates Moscow's layered air defense, the densest defensive architecture in Russia, and strikes the Mosfilm Tower in Moscow City. The impact point sits 3 kilometers from Russia's defense ministry, in the Russian capital, in the city where Putin's government operates. Ukraine does not need to hit the defense ministry. It needs only to demonstrate the corridor into which its weapons can travel, and the Mosfilm Tower does that work completely. The combination of the covert and the public is what makes the pressure on Putin so complete. The assassination campaign proves that individual targeting intelligence inside Moscow is achievable. The drone campaign proves that aerial reach into the capital itself is achievable. Together, they close every assumption of safety that Putin's system of protection rests on. The FSO can screen his cooks. The air defenses can intercept most drones. But neither the FSO nor the air defenses can guarantee that the next operation, whatever form it takes, will not be the one that finds him. This is the calculation Putin is running, underground in Krasnodar, sending substitutes to appear in public in his place, while former MI6 directors confirm the body double practice with certainty. He is not hiding from an abstract threat. He is hiding from a demonstrated capability that has already killed 3 senior figures inside Moscow in 2 years, and has shown the ability to strike buildings 3 kilometers from the heart of his government. He is not wrong to be afraid. The question is whether hiding saves him, or merely delays what is coming from a direction he cannot see from underground. Because the threats are not only coming from Ukraine, They are coming from inside the system Putin spent 26 years building. His approval rating has fallen for 12 of the last 14 weeks measured before late April of 2026. The seventh consecutive weekly decline, numbers dropping at a rate not recorded since 2018, when an unpopular pension reform briefly exposed the gap between Putin's projected strength and his actual political position. That episode was bounded, a policy change, something that could be partially walked back, cosmetically adjusted, waited out. This is not a policy crisis. This is the accumulated weight of 4 years of a war that was supposed to last days, arriving at the public's doorstep in the form of airport closures, air raid sirens in cities that were not supposed to be in range, and a Victory Day parade stripped of its military hardware because putting tanks in Red Square invites Ukrainian drones to find them. The public can hear the difference between a war that is going well and a war that has come home. No state media filter survives the sound of sirens in cities that the official narrative said were safe. The polling organization that tracks these numbers stops publishing them. On 2 separate dates when results are due, May 1st, then May 4th, nothing appears. An organization whose function is to provide Putin with legitimizing metrics of public support is apparently holding its own findings back. The numbers have become too damaging to publish. The apparatus of legitimation has stopped legitimating because the numbers it would need to publish would do the opposite. When your own propaganda instrument refuses to deploy itself, you are in a different category of political trouble than a poll with unfavorable results. But the deepest fracture is not in the numbers. It is in the voices. Russia's pro-war blogosphere is not the official state media. It is something more valuable to Putin than official media: voluntary amplification. The network of Telegram channels and online commentators who have spent 4 years choosing to promote the war, defend the decisions, boost recruitment, and provide the ideological justification for an invasion that would not survive honest public scrutiny. Their support cannot be mandated. It has to be earned, maintained, and continually renewed by a narrative that their audiences find credible. The narrative has stopped being credible to the people who built it. A lawyer and longtime pro-Kremlin voice with 90,000 Telegram followers publishes 5 reasons why he has stopped supporting Putin. Illegitimate. Failing war. Power corrupted beyond recovery. Putin's response is to have him committed to a psychiatric facility, reviving a Soviet-era instrument that the world stopped using because it signals, more clearly than any arrest, that the government cannot answer the argument and therefore must silence the person making it. The man is released and continues making it. Rybar, the most influential of the Z bloggers, whose military analysis has shaped pro-war opinion for years, calls the war a dead end. He accuses battlefield commanders of hiding the real casualty figures from Moscow. He accuses officials of stealing from the soldiers on the front. He is telling his audience, with the credibility of 4 years of embedded pro-war commentary behind him, that the people running this war are lying and stealing, and that it cannot be won. This is not opposition speaking. Russia's opposition is in prison, in exile, or under the ground. This is the scaffolding of Putin's information architecture announcing that it no longer believes in the building it was holding up. Putin is trying to shut down Telegram. Shutting it down confirms everything these voices are saying about the regime's relationship to truth and dissent. It intensifies public fury. It destroys another instrument of control he needs to function. He does it anyway because Telegram is where the fractures are showing, and a man who is hiding underground from physical threats cannot tolerate a platform where the ideological threats operate freely. Here is what the convergence of all 3 pressure tracks, assassination, drones, internal collapse, looks like when you zoom out to the level of regime dynamics. Political scientists who study personalist autocracies describe what happens when the security apparatus gains more power than the leader it ostensibly serves. The FSO has been handed unprecedented authority. It screens everyone around Putin with a thoroughness that has no precedent in his time in office. It controls his movements, his schedule, his communications environment. The bodyguards are not serving Putin. In practice, they are managing him, deciding where he can go, what he can see, how isolated he needs to be. The organization designed to protect his power has become the constraint on that power. And an FSO that has accumulated this much authority while running intelligence assessments about Putin's deteriorating political position, his falling approval ratings, his fractured loyalist base, and the whispered coup discussions in Russia's political elite, That FSO is an organization thinking about what comes after Putin, not just about keeping Putin in place. The coup whispers are real enough that Putin himself is reportedly aware of them. The possibility of an assassination using drones from within Russia, not Ukraine's drones, but those operated by domestic actors, is circulating at levels senior enough that it has reached outside analysts. Putin worries about threats from below the surface and threats from the air and threats from the people he trusts most. He built his regime to be impenetrable. He built the FSO and the surveillance state and the information controls and the loyalty networks and the layers of personal security that should have made him the most protected leader of any major power on Earth. And here he is, in a bunker, sending body doubles to public events, watching his approval ratings suppressed by the organization that used to broadcast them, reading the Telegram channels of his own propagandists denouncing him, unable to leave Moscow without closing airports, unable to hold a parade without stripping it of the hardware that would make it a target. Putin built this war for a Russia that believed in the story he was telling about it. The story is over. The Russia he built the story for no longer exists, and the man who is hiding underground from the consequences cannot find his way back to the surface without confronting what the surface has become. The deputy head of military intelligence was supposed to see threats coming. So was Putin. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.